Among the great what-ifs for students of LA rock history is, what if Lone Justice had remained a somewhat obscure band? And how many great records could they have put out if they had? It's almost a ridiculous scenario to imagine, because lead singer Maria McKee's vocal talent was such that quick discovery and absorption into the major label system was beyond inevitable. But what if some divine hand had pulled a cloak over the music industry's eyes, and Lone Justice had developed on its own timeline as a heavily country-influenced indie band, unencumbered by attention or expectations? The result, in this alternate universe, might have been something like Viva Lone Justice, the album that just came out from Fire Records, which is being touted as the band's first new album in 38 years. Maybe we can take the quotes off of that new. There really are fresh elements to these tracks, with additional parts being recorded and overdubbed on all but one of the 10 tracks. But most of the source material is vintage tapes that were laid down in the early 90s by McKee and fellow members Marvin Etzioni and Don Heffington when they were about to go out on one of her solo tours, in spontaneous living room sessions that were very much in the earliest, spunkiest spirit of early 80s Lone Justice. Etzioni recently came across the tapes and, at the enthusiastic suggestion of McKee, went into the studio with original guitarist Ryan Hedgecock to flesh out the tracks, while still leaving them sounding minimalist enough to sound raw, rough, and ready for those who were there to witness the band's most seminal days. Before Jimmy Iovine took over as their producer and steered the group toward becoming more of a Heartbreakers-style rock band, Viva Lone Justice is a godsend, finally capturing the spirit of that original lineup in a studio record, even if the studio was mostly Etzioni's living room. And if you happen to also love that Iovine-produced 1986 Geffen debut, which happened to be pretty great, even if it was undeniably slick, you can still get a kick out of Viva as a worthy spiritual prequel. Variety talked separately with McKee, Etzioni, and Hedgecock about how the album came together. Heffington, their drummer, died in 2021, although he's all over this record, as are past and present auxiliary players like Benmont Tench and Tammy Rogers. The following Q&A brings their voices together, edited for length, clarity, and conjoining viewpoints, to discuss this worthy and highly unexpected effort. How would you describe this record? Is it fair to say that it's archival recordings that you finished up in the present day? Marvin Etzioni: I would say that's pretty fair. We look at it as a new album. But it wasn't like the four of us got in the room before Don passed away, and we all just bashed it out. My personal reference point might be the Beatles' Let It Be, where here are a bunch of tapes and Phil Spector went in and did what he did to it. It wasn't like the whole band was there at the same time when those things were going on. Or Free as a Bird, where you take archive tapes and you kind of give it a sensibility where you are now. Maria McKee: it's archival with some overdubs. I didn't do any fresh vocals. Those vocals are from back then. I don't even know if I could remember how to sing like that anymore, with that kind of country purity. I think I've been too operatic for far too long. But I mean, I wasn't going to sing when I went on Dwight Yoakam's radio show recently, and then he was like, "Oh, come on, let's sing Don't Toss Us Away." And it came up, and there it was. So you never know. Ryan Hedgecock: to me this album was all about Maria's singing. She was singing so good on this that I wanted to be involved with it, and I wanted to get out there and really add my Lone Justice edge to it. In adding parts, I tried to keep it in line with what was already there. I tried to keep it so that you couldn't really tell that parts of it were recorded 30 years later. For us, I think it's really exciting just the fact to have the original vision finally intact and out, for people to hear the effortless go-between between punk and country. That was what the whole thing was about, tapping into that exuberant energy of country that kind of got lost in the 60s and 70s. And it's really nice to be able to see it out there with nobody's finger in it. You know what I mean? How did this all come together? McKee, Marvin, and I were hanging out. We would go for walks, and we'd go grab a meal over in the Pico Robertson neighborhood at Factor Deli and get lattes and chicken soup and walk around, just talking about everything. And then one day he said, "You know, I have these tapes that we recorded at my house during You Gotta Sin to Get Saved. You and me and Dawn and Benmont's on some of the tracks, Tammy's on some of the tracks. Some of it's great. Should I clean it up, and should we put it out?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" And he said, "Well, do you want it to be a Marie McKee project?" And I'm like, I don't really do hillbilly punk anymore so much. So let's get Ryan on it and then we can make a lone justice record. And he said, that's a really cool idea. Let me call Ryan. Then Ryan had some tracks that he and I had done about 15 years ago in Heffington's studio. And then Marvin dug around and found a few more tracks, and he and Ryan put it together. Ryan did a bunch of overdubs of guitars and vocals. And I didn't hear it until it was done. We went to Willie Aaron's house, and Marvin sat me down with a notebook, in case I had notes. And I was just floored. I just was like, this is fantastic. It is the greatest energy. And I thought I was in really good voice, and I was pretty blown away actually.